Indonesia, a tropical country located on the equator, is a country known for its diverse cultures. Bali, one of Indonesia's islands, has a vibrant culture and is famous in the world. One of the Balinese cultural arts, well-known types, is carving and fine arts, such as sculptures, paintings, and other handicraft arts. Yogyakarta also has well-known cultural properties, including batik, and of course, one of the people's means of transportation called beca. But wait, this is not in Yogyakarta or Bali. This is in Philadelphia, a city on the other side of the globe. Meet Laura Cohn, an artist who is responsible for bringing them from Bali to us.
Salam, I am Laura Cohn and I welcome you to Indonesia in Philadelphia. This is my warehouse and studio of our 24-year-old show called From Bali to Bala. And I have the good fortune of having two homes, one here in Philadelphia and the other, my heart home back in Indonesia. So I get to go home every year to spend time with friends and family, and I get to collect all these treasures here and buy directly from these incredible artisans I've been working with for over 25 years. So this is, I feel like I'm in little Bali or little Jawa when I'm in my basement here. I was born and raised in the Midwest in Chicago, and I ended up in Maine going to college. From Maine, I got a grant to go to Australia. So I realized as an artist, I was always drawn to Bali, because Bali has this tradition, this rich history of, in their Hindu Dharma, of the relationship between art and culture. It's very intertwined. So because I was in Australia and I looked at the map and I realized how close it was, I'm like, I'm going. But I had to get to Bali and I didn't have enough money to fly. So I took the Kelimutu, and it was, I think it was about equivalent of $13 US back then for a 10-day passage. And I went class gombing. I went below deck, and every day we stopped at a different port. We stopped in Flores, 2 ports. We stopped in Sumba, Sumbawa, in the Celebes. It was really amazing. But I was very illiterate, and I couldn't speak Indonesian. So I realized as all these people were staring at me, because I was so tall and out of place, I decided to engage and have them each teach me a word of Indonesian. And I stayed in Ubud for 2 months, and I found a studio to rent because I was an artist and I wanted to paint. But oil paints don't dry in the tropics, and I didn't know that. It was really hard to do. So I ended up, just because my life is very serendipitous and I meet people, the more you talk to people, the more you meet people and make connections. And I met someone who ran a small NGO at Udayana University, and he had money from a grant to hire a native English speaker for a project, and he gave me a job. And I stayed for 3 years. But I didn't get to paint. So in the meantime, I was falling in love with Balinese culture, but I really miss painting. So I went to Jogja on a break from work. And I stayed for 2 weeks, and Victor Sodrano is an orang Jogja, an incredible batik painter. And I worked with him for the 2 weeks, and I fell in love with batik. I translated my technical skills of oil painting with a brush, painting with oil paints, to painting with hot wax. And I just loved it. And I became a batik painter, a zealot, and I fell in love with it. And I started really loving Jogja, so I wanted to paint full time. So I gave up my home base in Ubud in Bali, and I moved to Jogja, and I got a home and a studio and continued to paint. And then every year I would come back to the US for about a month or 2 months and have these traveling shows of my paintings, of my batik paintings. I get to go to different cities where I knew friends and family and show off my paintings and sell them, enough to make money to go back and live in Jogja because it was so inexpensive. Then in 1994, through a connection with a friend in Bali, I met my husband Bill, who is from Philadelphia, and fell in love, and the rest is history. I came back to the US to marry him, and I had to figure out a way to keep Bali in my life, and that's how we started our little baby business that's grown for 24 years. So I decided to try to do batik as an oil painter, taking the same tradition and sensibilities that I had trained as an oil painter, which means taking a brush and using it as a painterly technique. So I would dip it in hot wax, and I apply hot wax as opposed to oils. And the other tool we work with is the chanting. Chanting is what most traditional batik is done with you dip it in hot wax and you make very small lines with hot wax, and the wax is the resist process. So you build up from the wax layer and then you put dye, and then where the wax is, it holds the color in place, and then you layer wax and dye until you get a finished piece. And you boil it at the very end. You boil the cloth and the wax comes out. In Indonesia, in my studio, I would boil them around a wood fire, and you have to dip it in the hot boiling water. Now I have actually a boil pot that I use outside. The other traditional tool we use in Indonesia to do batik is a chop. A chop is a beautiful, big, heavy, incredible piece of sculpture. It's made of copper, and it is made by chopsmiths in Central Java. And it is really beautiful, quite heavy, intricate little details of copper, and welded to the back of a frame. And they dip this in the hot wax, and then they make a resist print on the fabric if it was on the ground. And they build this up. This is a faster way to do it as opposed to just with chanting. They do chop after chop after chop. So I don't use traditional chops when I teach. I use homemade chops. Things from the kitchen sink, from spoons to all sorts of stuff. So if you can look at this as an example of a piece. And this is the top of an umbrella, of a Balinese temple umbrella that broke. So I dip this in hot wax and I make the resist print, and I use this in that same way as the chop makes a resist print throughout. So I use all sorts of unusual things that I find laying around. And when I teach, I ask students to bring in their own chops, and they bring in toys, anything that they can dip in wax and make a resist print. And this year I was in this incredible collection of chops I was able to get. I had a negative and a positive chop. I've already sold them, so they're gone, but it was so amazing. When I was unpacking them, I saw this chop is exactly the opposite of that chop. It was like I don't even know the word in English. And some of my work is very abstract, and some of it is very realistic. And then I also frame my pieces. A lot of people don't want to have it loose, they want it framed, so I present them in a traditional fashion as well. And through this, it made me fall in love with batik wood. And any other way they do batik. So Indonesia has batik fabric, and then they have batik on wood. So this is a more incredible batik. You can see, you wouldn't think this, if you touch this it feels like fabric, but this is done in the traditional technique where they take the hot wax and they make the fine lines with the chanting. They make all these fine little intricate dots with the chanting, and then they dip it in dye and they bring it back out and they dry it and they put more wax on. So it's a beautiful representation again of a traditional batik. You can see the relationship between this fabric and this wood. It's done in the same technique, separated by 1,000 years. These are deer antlers that are from here, from this region. You can see this is what a traditional kijang would look like. And I bring them to Indonesia. So I bring them in my suitcase, and when I get through customs in Bali, they're like, what are you doing with those? And I have to explain that I transform these into these. I work with these incredible, talented carvers. The village of Tampak Siring in Bali, in central Bali, is the bone carving village. Nyoman Luder, who is my friend and carver I've been working with for over 20 years. He transformed these pieces in about a month and a half for me. We decided that we would show my paintings in our living room when we lived in Balakinwood, and we happened to live in this town outside of Philadelphia that sounded great when we made the name From Bali to Bala, because it was to Balakinwood. So we would set it up like a little showroom in our living room, and the first year, 50 people came through in 4 days. They would knock on the door, we'd let them in, and we'd sell. And then it kept growing and growing and growing. And we were in our house for 8 years doing it that way. And then our neighbor complained because it kept getting too crowded, too much traffic on the street because it kept growing. So we started renting space down in Manayunk, not far from us, and we rented for 4 years, different spaces. And then we really decided to grow. When I say we, it's really my husband Bill and myself. We decided to take the leap, and we went to an area outside of Philadelphia called Chestnut Hill, which has a very beautiful main street and a very supportive commercial corridor for retail. And we're in Chestnut Hill for 10 years. So every year we go back and we rent a vacant space that's a busy part of town. We set up, it takes about us a week to set up and transform this space into an incredible showroom. And then this year, with COVID, life changed for everyone. Nobody is exempt, but I really do believe that obstacles are opportunities. And I was in Indonesia in March. I went thinking no biggie, I could just get there and quickly do my buying and come home. Well, I didn't get to do much of my buying because it quickly became evident I needed to leave sooner than later, or else I would have been stuck there, which would have been fine if I didn't have a family I wanted to be with here. I got on one of the last flights out on the 25th of March and got home. And I realized that I didn't have enough to do a show this year. We didn't know also that we couldn't have a show this year, but I started contacting my artisans that I had not met on WhatsApp. And I said, hey, can I go into the studio with you on your hand phone and you can show me what you have? And they're like, sure. So I ended up buying more than I've ever bought before because I was wanting to help them because I knew that it was going to be a bleak next year for them without any tourism and no business in handicraft industry, or very little. So I ended up getting a shipment. Normally I bring about 5 cubic meters home. I ended up with 7 cubic meters. So I just really felt my little infusion of dollars helped the local artisans a lot. And then we realized we needed to figure out a way to sell it. When we had the idea to start the online business, it was directly because we knew we weren't going to be able to have a physical show this year. And also we do events, so we have a gamelan concert. We couldn't have that. We do dinners where there's generally a sit-down dinner for 40 people in the middle of the showroom, and we knew we couldn't do that. So the cultural events we didn't think we could do, and that to me broke my heart that we couldn't do it. So we spent 5 months photographing every item. I've got over 1,500 items here in the studio, and everyone has an individual picture. And then we built a website, and we launched, and I'm like every other online store, but if you click on my site, From Bali to Us, you'll leave learning a lot more about another part of the world than you ever thought. It's not just buying a Buddha. You get a lot of education at the same time. And we decided to make it Bali to Us because us is obviously, us as the big collective post-pandemic, is that we realize we are more connected than ever and we have much more in common than ever. Us is a much more warm, fuzzy, we're all in one family, us. And then US is that it is obviously from Bali to the US. It could be from Indonesia to the US, it's not all from Bali, but it sounds better, so.
Selamat siang, my name is Daniel. I help Mom with a lot of the data management, a lot of photo editing, and yeah, I'm really proud of how it turned out.
Have you been to Indonesia?
Yes, I have been to Indonesia 8 times. I went every other year when I was young, from a baby until I was in middle school, and then because it was hard to miss high school, I didn't go during high school. But I went back in 2018 after I did my 2nd year at college, and I hope to go back once this pandemic is over. Hopefully sooner rather than later. But yeah, I love Indonesia. It's my second home in a lot of ways, and I'm really fortunate that we're able to bring it to so many people like this.
Here we go. It's very heavy, and you need to have melon calves like the Tukan, Beceks, and Jogja, and I don't. so it's too heavy for me to drive. But I love my Batik, and I always dreamed of having a Batik at my show. I just never realized I'd be able to have an authentic one from Jogja that was so beautifully preserved. We've had this about 10 years, and I put it in front of my showroom. It's always the highlight. People come and pose for pictures. It still has the old bell. So if I was really to be authentic, I would actually be sitting in here asleep like most Batik drivers are, taking my afternoon nap after working all day. And it just grounds me to Jogja, which is another important part of my heart, really important part of my heart. I felt early on that selling in America and supporting the capitalism by people buying and buying and buying never felt very good to me. But if I could tie it to philanthropy, it made me feel better. And I found out it made my customers feel better. So we have religiously every year donated 10% of our sales. And there, on my website, I have a list of the 15 or so different nonprofits that have been benefactors of us. It's always small scale, it's not very much, but it adds up over time.
If we can bring its wonderful culture to as many places as we can, I think that's all the better. And I think I'm really proud of how it's done, and I really hope to see it continue once the pandemic ends.
When the South Philly Indonesian community started growing in the late 90s, I interfaced with them a lot more, and I wanted to find ways to enrich and support them as well. And there's so many opportunities to work with artisans and dancers and musicians and chefs and foodies in South Philly to let the American public, the Philadelphia region, and now a broader region, know about Indonesian culture. So that's why the mission has become much bigger for me, is to do outreach about Indonesian culture and to build bridges from there to here and here to there. It's not just selling handcrafts, it's really about cross-cultural education and outreach.